All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. What's up, everybody? My people in Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, or about Staten Island, my homeborough, Brooklyn. Back as another video, and today marks the 20th anniversary of the rapper The Game's debut hip hop album, The Documentary. You know, an underrated classic album in my view, one of the best albums of the 2000s, and the album is very significant for helping put the West Coast back on the map. But let's get into that. A little backdrop. Of course, West Coast hip hop dominated the sound of hip hop in the late 80s and throughout the 90s. Their G-Funk style, which of course was innovated by the great Dr. Dre and various other West Coast artists. Thanks to a string of classic albums from legendary MCs such as Ice Cube's America's Most Wanted, Dr. Dre's The Chronic, Dog Food from the Dog Pound, and Doggy Style from Snoop, and so many others, the West Coast rose to prominence to become the prominent scene in hip hop in the 90s. Of course, the East Coast rose back up in the time period known as the East Coast Renaissance, and of course, we all know to the quote unquote East Coast West Coast hip hop feud throughout the 90s. And one of the biggest stars of the West Coast rap scene at the time was Tupac Shakur, even though he was from Harlem/Baltimore and only moved to Oakland. He was, I believe, 17 years old. He was one of the biggest stars in hip hop, particularly in the West Coast hip hop at the time. But in 1996, we all know Tupac Shakur was shot in Las Vegas and died 6 days later on September 13th of 1996. And when Pac died, so did the West Coast. The West Coast fell off after that. Snoop Dogg was a big star in hip hop, but he kind of fell off a little bit until he found himself again down south with No Limit Records. And No Limit didn't have that traditional West Coast G-Funk sound. And the rest of the guys, to say this respectfully, they didn't have the star power of a Tupac or a Snoop Dogg to carry the West Coast scene. And, Ice Cube, at that point in his career, Ice Cube was doing more movies than he was music. I mean, he was still doing music, had some good songs, but he wasn't, the king of the West Coast per se. Of course, Eazy-E had passed away, and so on and so forth. So the West Coast fell off for a long time. Now, in 1999, Dr. Dre tried to attempt a West Coast renaissance with his classic album, 2001, with classic songs such as Still DRE and Next Episode and so on and so forth. Forgot About Dre. And the album was very, very good. But still, the West Coast couldn't capture that magic they'd had in the early mid-90s. And of course, Dr. Dre at this point was more of a producer and an executive. He helped find and cultivate rap megastars such as Eminem and 50 Cent. Of course, Eminem's from Detroit and 50 Cent's from Queens, New York. Okay, so the West Coast had no stars. They had no superstars. Okay, and Dr. Dre wanted to return his hometown, his home region, back to its former glory. Enter The Game, a.k.a. Jason Taylor, born and raised in the mean streets of Compton, California. He grew up idolizing NWA, of course, led by Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, the late great Eazy-E, MC Ren, DJ Yella, Arabian Prince, so on and so forth. Snoop Dogg and all these guys. He rapped about it many times. Matter of fact, he had a song called Game's Pain featuring Keisha Cole. He said, Ice Cube's my favorite rapper. Y'all niggas can't tell me nothing. Dr. Dre saw the talent of this young man from Compton, California. He was a great rapper, no doubt, but he couldn't make songs. So he could battle rap and come up with clever bars and all that stuff, but he couldn't put songs together. But he had a lot of potential, so Dr. Dre took him on, signed him to Aftermath, and paired him with 50 Cent. 50 made him a member of G Unit. 50 taught him how to write songs and come up with clever hooks. Something 50 could do at the time. And 50 at this time was probably the biggest star in hip hop. From like 03 to about 05. You had other guys, of course, Kanye and a young Kanye and a young Lil Wayne, so on and so forth, a rising T.I., so on and so forth. But, 50 was probably undisputedly the biggest star in hip hop at this time. So Game had Dr. Dre and the biggest star in rap working on his debut album, The Documentary. Okay, which returned that old school West Coast G-Funk vibe, supported by singles such as How We Do, featuring 50 Cent, of course, Hate It or Love It, featuring 50 Cent, and Dreams. These singles, the album did well, moved a lot of units, went platinum, and for some people, the West Coast was back. And of course, Game and 50 had developed issues around this time, and they've never really resolved those issues. But here's an article I found from Genius.com. The Documentary at 20, How the Game Resurrected the West Coast and name dropped his way to the top. Jason Taylor put the West Coast on his back and name dropped 318 times. It's hard to imagine there was ever a time when the West Coast wasn't the dominant sound in rap, especially given the past 12 months of how Kendrick Lamar's dismantling of Drake unified a region, fired up on California pride as the rest of the world tipped their Dodger caps for solidarity. But there really was such a moment. Yeah, I mean, at this point in hip hop, nobody's really dominant, I would say. No, I know a lot of people, that might be a controversial hot take, but I wouldn't say anybody's dominant. You could probably say Atlanta if you want to. Atlanta, New York City, Chicago, LA, the Bay Area, Texas, New Orleans, Memphis. Now, to me, nobody's really dominant. I mean, you can say the West Coast did last year. You know, Memphis they got a lot of stars, but to me, really, nobody's dominating hip hop right now. Hip hop is so big right now and it's so globalized that, you know, global. I mean, back in the '90s, even in the 2000s, you had regional, the West Coast, particularly LA, Compton, Long Beach. They did G Funk. The Bay Area, they did hyphy. You know, Chicago, they had their style. You know, the Midwest, they did those chopper flows and that fast-paced rapping style, or the hibbity hibbity hobbity hobbity, you know, so on and so forth. Down in Houston, they did chopped and screwed. In New Orleans, they did bounce. In Memphis, they did crunk and trap music, or what would become crunk and trap music, or what, according to Juicy J in Memphis, they called it get buck music. Miami did bass. Atlanta did their thing. You know, even Virginia, you know, the Neptunes and Missy Elliott and all of them, they had their kind of futuristic sound. Like, hip hop used to be so regional. And don't forget New York. And even in New York, everybody was different. Nas had his style. DMX and the Rough Riders had their style. Wu-Tang had their style. Mobb Deep, Big before he passed away. Jay-Z, like, everybody was different. Now, everybody copies each other. Nobody really sounds the same. And that's why, you know, hip hop is dying a little bit. But, you know, again, that's probably going to be a controversial opinion and a hot take, but, you know, it is what it is. Anyway, long after Ice-T and NWA introduced gangster rap to the masses, and following the inescapable West Coast takeover of Death Row Records and star players Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac, there was a lull in California love, resulting in other youth regions taking the lion's share of rap fans' attention. Sure, there was Dr. Dre's Game Changer 2001, as well as successful albums by Cypress Hill, Skull and Bones, Ice Cube's War and Peace, Volumes 1 and 2, and Exhibit's Restless. Outside of these, maybe a few others, from about 97-05, rappers under the rule of Diddy's Shiny Suit era, the crunk and trap movements of the South, and New York's last true reign as hip-hop's top dog, absolutely. Plus superstars Nelly, Eminem, DMX, Jay-Z, and 50 Cent. However, the dawn of the New West Coast era was brilliant. Absolutely, like I said, Nelly had his kind of style, that St. Louis style. Eminem is kind of shock jock, Midwest Detroit style. DMX is that hardcore, rough, gritty, cold New York style. Jay-Z, his lyrical miracle style, rapping about his chains and his women, and so on and so forth. And 50 Cent with his straight gangster Queens style hip hop. You know, of course, Jay-Z also that Rockefeller sound, which was known as Chipmunk Soul, pioneered by Kanye and Just Blaze and all them cats. But, you know, like I said, everybody used to have their own sound, their own style. Now everybody just copies one another. And it's honestly you know, I don't want to get into all that. But anyway, enter the game. While recovering in the hospital from gunshot wounds he sustained during the home invasion in 2001, the Game, real name Jason Taylor, used the time to listen to and study albums like I like the Biggie, Snoop Dogg, Big Daddy Kane, Ice Cube, Jay-Z, and Dr. Dre. A year later, with the help of Big Brother Big Face, the confident rapper released his first mixtape, You Know What It Is, Volume 1. It then signed to JT, the Bigger Figures, Get Low Records, through which he released a few projects, and that's when he caught the attention of Dr. Dre. In 2003, Game jumped on Dre's back, as he put it, and signed to Aftermath Entertainment. The buzz was deafening. It's one of those moments where you had to have been there to understand the gravitas of it. The stranglehold he had on hip-hop at the time when New York rap was dominating the airwaves and mixtapes was immense and helped massively when he was paired with 50 Cent, the biggest thing in music at the time. Became the official fifth member of G-Unit. Of course, 50, Banks, Ayo, Young Buck, who's from Nashville, and the Game was from Compton. When he wasn't appearing on magazine covers and starring in ad campaigns for Sean John and Boost Mobile, he was making cameos, music videos like 50 Cent in the Club, dropping guest verse left and right. Released on January 18, 2005, the documentary was a massive success straight out the gate. It began number one on the Billboard 200 charts, selling 586 units in its first week. It's not only thrust Game even further as a superstar, but revived the once dominant West Coast rap scene, putting it back where it belonged at the forefront of hip-hop conversation. And last year they had a very good year. Kendrick Lamar, Tyler the Creator, and so on and so forth. Anyway, playing like one big West Coast celebration, the album Here's Game played homage to legends of old as well as some new rappers at that time, all while being soundtracked by the same gruff yet occasionally sound Dre, who executive produced the documentary alongside 50 brought to life on 2001. While everyone loved G-Funk and the more traditional sounds of the West Coast, a new West Coast savior demanded a fresh sound. Supported by multiple hit singles like Hate It or Love It, West Side Story, How We Do in Dreams. The album features guest spots from 50 Cent, Eminem, Mary J., Busta Rhymes, Nate Dogg, Faith Evans, R.I.P. Nate Dogg, Sony Yayo, Marsha Ambrosius, as well as production from Dr. Dre, Cool and Dre, Scott Storch, Timbaland, Just Blaze, Kanye, High Tech, Havoc, and others. Now went on someone 5 million copies worldwide by the end of 05, even earned a game couple of Grammy noms. Like I said, this album was very pivotal to reviving the West Coast. Game became the new king of the West Coast at that time. Until, the Kendrick Lamar's ready to take over Kendrick Lamar and so on and so forth. Tyler, the Creator, he's not, of course, a traditional, what we would probably expect from a West Coast rapper, but, he is from Cali. So, you got to put him in that West Coast rap territory, if you will. But anyway, like I said, I love this album personally. Tell me what you guys think in the comment section down below. Don't forget to click like button, subscribe. I'm see you all.